Pachia Lucy Vang is a curator and designer creating ntaub textile arts in her studio Culture Through Cloth. She holds a BA in anthropology from UC Berkeley and is a current MFA candidate of design at UC Davis, where she is merging textile and exhibition design to curate, create, and reimagine through Hmong knowledge. Please give a warm virtual welcome to our speaker, Pachia Lucy Vang.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to give a big thanks to you, Elena, along with Sue and Deborah, who is behind the scene. It's really exciting to be a part of this speaker series and to be the first in the speaker series as well, to share a bit more with about California history with the Hmong and threads of the Hmong diaspora. So like Elena mentioned, I am a curator, I am a designer, I am also a Hmong American, and I've been researching Hmong clothing and textiles for the past 10 years. My research has really revolved around looking at textiles not just as an art or a craft, but really understanding it as a design and as something functional that has been used not just to clothe our bodies and to exist in our ceremonies, but to really keep us united, because we are a people that are spread out throughout the world. And so this talk, I'll be giving an introductory and very brief overview of Hmong history here in California. And then I'll be diving more into what our textiles are, and how you can better understand that within the context of our identities and who we are as Hmong people, along with our diaspora and history. So if you are familiar with the Hmong people, then you are probably also very familiar with our textile work and with our embroidery work, which includes story cloths. And so there are a variety of story cloths within our textile traditions. And sometimes people think that story cloths have been with us for a very long time, but story cloths are a relatively new creation, documenting the stories of our past when we were living in the refugee camps in Thailand. So this specific story cloth is a story about our displacement and our diaspora. It's a migration story cloth. And story cloths, like I was saying, was first created in the refugee camps. And so most recently, the Hmong in California migrated here after the end of the Secret War, which took place from 1959 to 1975. And this is known as the Laotian Civil War in Laos, which really was a proxy war alongside the Vietnam War and the Cold War. But in this war, the Hmong who were living in Laos were recruited to help the American CIA and the American troops. And so at the end of the Vietnam War, when the Americans left, then many Hmong were in disarray. Many Hmong who had helped the American army and military were in disarray, and many of them were fleeing the country to seek refuge and in other countries. And many people sought refuge in the refugee camps of Thailand. And in Thailand, they were resettled to other parts of the world, including the US. And so this story cloth depicts that story, and it goes beyond this very recent history of us being refugees of Laos to Thailand to also include our long, vast history as refugees out of China. So our history spans 2,500 years, and we are indigenous to the Central Plains of China, where we've made our homes throughout different parts of China today, along the Yellow River, where we remember having lived in a kingdom where we were then displaced and we had to cross multiple rivers, and where we were then moving into other countries such as Burma, such as Vietnam, such as Laos, and such as Thailand, and where we've made it here to California today. And so I'm a Sacramento native, and I thought that to talk a little bit more about Hmong history here in California, I would share with you the story of the first family who was resettled here in Sacramento. And so a few years ago, I was part of a a grassroots exhibition effort called Hmong Story 40. And we were really interested in, uncovering the local history of California and how we got here today and how our communities have really developed and what we've gone through throughout the last 40 years since we started coming to the US in 1975. And so we were able to locate the first family here in Sacramento, the Kang family. And this included Chubi Kang, who's right there in the middle, along with his wife, Pua Yang, right above him. And then his young son at the time, Kam Kang, and his younger brother, Nia Kang. And so they were the first family here, the first few individuals. And Chubi was a child soldier who was recruited to be in the war. He eventually became a nurse at the front lines. And when the war ended, he and his family left to Thailand to be in the refugee camps, where a year later in 1976, they actually applied for the resettlement program under the extended parolee program, which was then processed through Catholic Social Services. And their paperwork was processed through family reunification. And so they were expecting to be reunified with family that had already come here before them in Hawaii. But unbeknownst to them, they were coming to Sacramento. So when they arrived, they were extremely confused. They were met by their sponsor, who had a very hard time communicating with them because none of them spoke English. And they lived on only $20 a week for quite some time because this was what their sponsor was able to provide to them. And so it was really difficult for them. And Chubi eventually enrolled in English classes, where he then met a Thai woman who introduced him to the welfare system. And this is when, things really came around for them, and they were able to become much more self-efficient. And so after studying English for half a year, he had improved on his English skills, so he was then able to get a job as a dishwasher. And after enough time, he was then able to help other relatives back in Thailand process their own resettlement paperwork, and eventually bring people and family members to Sacramento, where the community started growing. His younger brother, Nia Ka, actually came and was registered on his paperwork at a much older age. So he was 13 at the time, but they registered him as 23. And you'll find that a lot of Hmong people were experiencing these types of discrepancies in their paperwork because many people didn't know their birthdays. We didn't operate on the same types of calendars here in the West, or when we were out living in Laos. And so many people weren't aware of their correct age. Maybe they had an idea. Sometimes they were registered much higher. But he attended English classes as well, and was enrolled in high school. And he found that he did pretty well. Like, even though he was much younger, he could still keep up with everyone. And so after 3 years, he eventually went on to complete his associate's degree at only the age 16, where he eventually went on to complete his bachelor's and master's in social work and become a social worker to really help the community. And then going back to Chubi, he would actually go on to help establish different cultural competency programs at local schools, which was extremely important for families and new communities, just as they are today for refugee communities, because kids were supported by the school system. They were there every day. And so it was extremely important to have these cultural competency programs in place. And he helped establish the first cultural competency programs, which later on would then develop into some of our first nonprofits providing social service. But he would then also become the first executive director of the Lao Family Community nonprofit, which gave back and provided social services for the community as well. And after this, he would go on to continue working in the field of refugee resettlement, where he worked with the International Rescue Committee, along with World Relief for many years until he retired. And so this is the story of the first family that came to Sacramento as you can see, you know, they felt a real sense of duty in helping other Hmong people. And I'm sure this is a very similar story to many other families. I can think of other families I know of now who came, who share very similar paths in giving back to the community and helping people come here from the refugee camps as well. So there were, you know, in the late 70s, when people were first immigrating here, there were really only a few families, but, you know, thanks to the help of the first individuals, by the 1980s, there were over 20,000 Hmong people in California. And today, with the 2020 census, there's over 100,000 people living throughout California. And so when the Hmong first started migrating to the US, the policy at the time was to split up people all throughout the US, but people were really attracted to California. People were really in search of community. And so many people then moved here. My father's family, for example, was in New York. My mother's was in Iowa, but eventually everyone flocked to California. And this was because there was a very liberal welfare system that could support and help people. Along with this, also there is a bustling agricultural industry here, and the Hmong have a long history of being farmers and agriculturalists and horticulturalists, and so it made a lot of sense for them to come. And you'll see here that these are the towns which you will find large Hmong communities in. So Fresno, California is where the largest amount of Hmong people live here in California, followed by Sacramento. And then of course with agriculture, then there were just naturally communities that developed throughout the Central Valley. And it was in the mid-1980s, moving up to the 90s, that then more families would go north up into Marysville and Oroville and Chico, where they were really drawn to the slow life of the smaller towns, along with its accessibility to nature and the mountains and the wilderness, which people, you know, really remembered and missed from Laos. So to give a bit more background, we're spread all throughout California, and you know that's very innate in how we live because we've also been spread all throughout different parts of Asia as well. Like I was talking about with the story on the story cloth depicting our migration, the Hmong are originally from China. And so in China, we are an ethnic group that are a part of the Miao nationality. There are 56 recognized nationalities in China, and the Hmong are part of the Miao nationality, which is made up of a variety of other ethnic groups. So the Hmong are perhaps the largest. Here on this map, you can see we're classified as Western Hmong, which is what the Hmong in California and having come from Laos, tracing our roots back would be considered Western Hmong or simply Hmong, because then we share this classification with other groups that we are related to, like historically, which include the Mu, the Hsiong, and the Miao. And together, there's really been this reclamation of history and of kinship that we are revisiting and relearning from one another to this day. And we have communities and villages and whole cities really in autonomous regions that are spread throughout Southwest China. So this includes the provinces of Hunan, of Guizhou, of Guangxi, Sichuan, and Yunnan. And then more recently, within the last couple hundreds of years, you will see that the Hmong then start moving down into Southeast Asia. So this includes Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and just very sparse parts of Burma where there are a few communities living. But as a part of this diaspora, you know, clothing plays a really big part of who we are and our identity. So in China, there's actually a term that says for every 100 Miao people, there are 100 Miao outfits. And that rings very true. And so you can, if you're familiar with Hmong clothing, you can maybe pick out some more recognizable outfits in this array of photos that are distinctly Hmong. The two men in the bottom middle, for example, are wearing Hmong outfits from Thailand, so we can denote that they're probably living in Thailand, or this photo was taken in Thailand. And among them are a variety of costumes from other Miao groups who may not be Hmong, but are akin to Hmong because we share ancestry, or we share regions that we lived in together. We share some connections through language and culture and traditions. And you can also see that very visibly through the textiles and the clothing and the patterns and the similarities in not just clothing styles and colors and our headdresses and the silver that we wear, but also in the motifs and the stories behind them. So in the Hmong language, we call our textile art bandao, which means flower cloth, and ba means flower, and dao means cloth. And so it's very interesting. I generally start out any of my talks and, educational experiences where I'm teaching people about Hmong textiles, defining this because I think it's very revealing about all the inner workings that go behind it. So ba means flower. And I think that when you dig into the meaning of flowers or the settings of where flowers come from, aesthetically, the impact of our clothing has the same effect as a flower. A flower is this blooming, budding, beautiful thing that you find often in nature. If you're living, in Laos, in the forest or in the jungle, in a village, and you see the budding of flowers, and they really pop out at you, and they're bright and they're vibrant, and they bring you joy. And there's just this feeling you get when you see beautiful flowers, and that's really what's encaptured in the brightness and the vibrancy and boldness of Hmong clothing. And that's something that we've really held on to. You can see the vibrancy of these threads behind me as I'm speaking. And then Dao is very interesting because it has multiple meanings, right? Dao, quite frankly, means cloth. But if you get more poetic and if you start using it in other ways, it can be used as Dao Dao, which means document, or it can reference paper or even text, which relates to, textiles, long relationship, text and textiles. That connection exists throughout the world. And so here again, you find it. But thinking about Hmong spirituality and cultural beliefs, Dao Dao can also reference a type of destiny, because it's believed that when you are born into this world, you're given your papers, your destiny. And, it's not that you can't change it, but it sets up the trajectory of your life. And so in many ways, I think of textiles as a part of, this destiny per se. You can change the destiny, but it's written and it kind of lays out who you are really and where you're going. And textiles were actually made at the inception of the Diaspora, where we were displaced from the original kingdom in China along the central plains, or along the river in the central Yellow River in the Central Plains, where we had a writing, and we had writing system and books and knowledge. But because we were displaced, all of these things were burned or they were banned in an effort for us to assimilate. And so we were able to capture what we could of our knowledge and our history and our writing into our cultural ceremonies and our practices and our textiles, which we then carry with us and have become an important identifier of who we are all throughout the world. And we continue to hold this today here in California as well. So diving into what bandao is, bandao is, made of thread and cloth. It's textiles. You take threads and you weave them together and you make cloth, and then you can put more threads on it and put more cloth on it and create these intricate, beautiful designs. Traditionally, I'm just going to be speaking about, and when I use the term traditionally, I'm referring to historically. But traditionally, we will be speaking about the Hmong from Laos, which represents the Hmong in California, because we've most recently migrated from there, so we can make that distinction and that connection very clearly. But our textile traditions primarily and traditionally include batik, applique, reverse applique, and embroidery. And a piece of clothing or an article of clothing and garment that best represents that is the Hmong skirt, which utilizes a variety of these techniques that encompasses what bandao is. And so generally to make a skirt, you would have to plant hemp plants, and then you would wait for them to grow to a very tall height where you would cut them down and you would strip off all of the leaves. And then you would harvest them and bring them back home to dry them. You would peel them and then you would pound them, and they would turn into these stringy textures that you can then spin together essentially to make threads, which you can then weave to create hemp cloth. And from this cloth, you can create a variety of designs. And so for the skirt itself, you would first draw with wax in the process of starting a batik design, which is just a name for a wax resist dye. And then once you draw with this wax onto the hemp cloth, what it does is it protects the areas of the cloth that the wax encases. And so then when you dip it into the indigo bath, those areas that are protected do not get dyed and do not turn blue. So then once you boil it, all the wax will come off and melt away, and you're left with this very beautiful black or blue and white design, which can take various shades of blue, various intensities of white. But then you would have drawn areas that you could then cover in with pieces of fabric in a process called applique, which is essentially a type of quilting that refers to applying fabric on top of other fabric to create a design. And you can finish it with any additional embroidery that you would like. And so this is an example of a black Hmong skirt that's fully decorated. You can see that the batik sits in the middle, and then the bottom has this beautiful band of embroidery. And there's actually applique all throughout both the black batik area along with the bottom area, which is embroidered. And this is a very ornate and decorated skirt. It's very common now, but in the past, skirts worn by Black Hmong women weren't necessarily always this decorated. In fact, they were sometimes just left completely black, which is why the Black Hmong get their name, Black Hmong. Another example of a textile piece that utilizes a variety of these techniques is the baby carrier, which is very popular. And the baby carrier exists in Hmong communities all throughout the diaspora back into China. But you can see here, there's some batik, there's some applique, and there's even pom-poms. So if we take a closer look, the batik is etched on very delicately, those white areas covered by indigo. It's probably been dipped multiple times to turn black. So it looks black and it's not necessarily blue. And then they applique the red fabric on top. And a more, another variety of applique, I guess, is this back collar piece, which I'll talk more about later. But you can see there's a variety of motifs that have been appliqued. There's the pink parts that are appliqued, there's the white parts that are appliqued, and then there's the little triangles in different colors that are appliqued. And then of course we have embroidery. And so there are a variety of stitching. Cross stitching is the most popular type of embroidery. But if you're familiar with embroidery, we also employ like chain stitching, satin stitching, which we call lohai. And stitching is generally done on belts, which you see here, along with aprons, collars, sleeve cuffs, and headdresses. You'll see that more as we go through the presentation. And then last but not least is the reverse applique, which I didn't really get to go into because we don't see it on the skirt or the baby carrier, but it's essentially the reverse of applique, where instead of cutting out strips that you would then apply on, you're creating an inverted design. So you cut out the design onto a large piece of fabric, and then you'll fold back those designs for the image to appear. So for example, the black swirly motifs, if this was an applique piece, would probably be white if we're using white fabric. But we've chosen to invert it, and so the white fabric is cut into and folded back to show the black fabric underneath. So they're an interplay of one another. And these techniques and bandao was recently on display at Sac State here in Sacramento. At the University Library Gallery, I recently curated an exhibition called Cloth as Community, where we looked at a variety of clothing styles from throughout the diaspora, going into also these different techniques, so you can take a closer look at it. There's still a display up until the 25th. And it'll be closing. This larger gallery has been closed already, but there's a smaller display up in special collections you can view. And one really interesting thing that we had in this exhibition was an interactive map where people could take a closer look at the diaspora based on clothing. And so this is not an expansive map at all, meaning that it doesn't include all the different types of clothing there are among the Hmong. But it does include, you know, a lot of the outfits and styles in regions that many of us in California are familiar with or have connections to in China. We have a few individuals in the community who come from Guangxi, for example. And so because of that, we're able to learn more about the Hmong communities in Guangxi. And then here you see outfits from throughout Vietnam, from throughout Laos. There's one outfit from Myanmar, which to my understanding is perhaps the only Hmong group that live there, and then 2 outfits featured from Thailand. But there was an interactive component because we were really interested in seeing, you know, where people came from. And there was an option to put a black sticker on where your family is from and a colorful sticker on your favorite outfit or style. And so you can see here that predominantly there are many people who put stickers on number 7, which is from Luang Prabang in Laos. And of course, all the other highly rated numbers are also regions from Laos as well, such as, you know, number 9, for example, which is from Sengkuang. And this is showcasing not just the region, but also the subgroup, which we'll go into. But we are primarily from Laos. Like I said, there are some newer individuals who have joined the community within the past few years from China and Vietnam and other places. But a lot of the people who first came here, like the King family, came from Laos through the refugee camps. And so there are 7 main regions that we find Hmong communities in Laos that are also very pronounced because of the outfits, the traditional outfits that they wear are attributed to these regions. So first and foremost, we have Luang Prabang, which you can see is very popular, a very commonplace. My own family came from Luang Prabang. Luang Nam Ta, which is right above Luang Prabang. I actually don't know if there are a lot of people from Luang Nam Ta. I don't necessarily see a lot of those traditional outfits when I go to the local Hmong New Year's here, but when I was in Laos, I met quite a few people from Luang Nam Ta, and I do notice there are some differences in our textile techniques and motifs that we like to use, and colors as well. And then Udom Sai, Vientiane, Hua Pan, Sengkuang, you do find families from those regions that live here in California. And I mentioned subgroups. So outfits are classified and people are historically classified or historically just identify with regions. But we also classify ourselves and who we are and our identities through our language, through our clothing style, through colors that depict our language. And so it's a fluid it's a fluid, these are fluid classifications. As you'll see in the upcoming example, they can change. And it's also a reason why I write Hmong, and there is a push to start writing Hmong with the capital H and the capital N, because writing Hmong this way is more inclusive of all the different varieties or types of Hmong people there are in our community. We're not just a homogenous group of people, you know, we have various traditions, we speak various dialects, you know, our culture and our religion and spirituality change from family to family. We descend from different places. And so just to dive into this a little bit, classifiers can include colors. So for example, there's the black Hmong, the white Hmong, the green Hmong. There's also a red Hmong, but that is not a classifier that the Hmong themselves use. This is the classifier that was given by anthropologists, perhaps describing the red colors that some Hmong groups would use when really they are black Hmong, or Hmong Leng. And Hmong Leng is a dialect because black Hmong, white Hmong, green Hmong represent languages and dialects, but Hmong Leng is a dialect and it doesn't represent a color at all. And then there's also ways to classify yourself based on clothing style. So there's the blue-hearted apron styled Hmong. There's the striped Hmong, which you read very commonly about and see in books. And then there's also the flower Hmong, but similar to the red Hmong classification, flower Hmong is used as a description to describe groups of Hmong people in Vietnam. But in my travels there, people agree with being called flower Hmong, but based on their lineage and how they actually identify, they don't call themselves flower Hmong. Many of them come from white Hmong groups or black Hmong groups. So it is really a fluid identity, and not everything has been fully fleshed out or documented yet. For example, very recently, you know, I began to understand that there are migration classifications too, like Old Hmong and New Hmong. And that's something that I learned in my own family line and my own experience. Because for me, if I were to meet another Hmong person for the first time, they may be interested in who I am and where I come from. So I would say, you know, I'm of the Vang clan, Pachia Lucy Vang, and I am white Hmong. And my family, I mean, I come from California and Sacramento now, which I would say, but I would say also that my family came originally from Luang Prabang, and that we are the Hmong who wear the blue-hearted apron styles, and that we're the old Hmong. And I never really understood what old Hmong meant, but until actually I met other people who identified as new Hmong. And then with some digging, I realized that that referred to the time of migration. So some Hmong people came prior to other Hmong people. So the old Hmong were the first people to migrate to Laos, to the Luang Prabang region, versus the newer Hmong who came at a later time. And this was something that I could then apply to my own family that I did not know about. And so just to give you some pictures, for example, the image of the ladies and girls on the left are pictures of my relatives from my dad's side. These are white Hmong outfits, the blue-hearted aprons. And then the picture on the right is of my grandmother and her cousin. And this is from my mother's side. And my mother's side, they're striped Hmong. So you see here very visually that there were striped armbands on their arms, and that's what distinguishes them. But my mother's side is new Hmong, whereas my father's side is old Hmong. And so that's just talking about when they migrated. And it's very interesting because my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, can actually remember when her grandparents and parents migrated from Vietnam to Laos. So it was much more recent than my father's side, who had already been in Laos for 3 to 4 generations. But my grandmother recalled, you know, her family migration story directly from Vietnam. So many years ago, they went on a family finding trip to reconnect with relatives in Vietnam, and they found their relatives in Dien Bien Phu, which is very close to the border. But you could see here there are many similarities in dress, but there are also many changes just within a few generations. So for me, with my analytical mind, I'm looking at, how the headdress has changed, the shape and the silhouette has stayed the same, but the pom-poms have become much smaller. Maybe that was a way to distinguish being a new Hmong group from an old Hmong group, because the old Hmong wore these headdresses with really big pom-poms. So maybe they didn't want their pom-poms to be as big. But you can also see that the armbands have gotten much bigger, which seem to match the large cuffs on the white Hmong outfits. And then they've also added the blue hearted middle to their aprons, and adopted the fold. You can see like the folded lines in the apron as well. And so there are some differences. And what's interesting also is that the family members in Vietnam that my grandparents visited are Black Hmong, and they speak the Black Hmong language. But my family is White Hmong, both on my mom and my dad's side. And they say that's because when they migrated into Laos, they assimilated and changed their dialect. And so that change happened very rapidly, just within a generation and a half. But I think that's a very interesting and fascinating self-discovery that I made through my own family, because I think a lot of times when we talk about traditional dress and traditions, we often think that they're rooted in a time past and we have to keep them the same. But the thing about fashion is that it's always changing, and that's an integral part to understanding fashion and to fashion theory, is simply that fashion is always changing. And I think that's a really important part of keeping culture alive too, is to allow it to change, but to not forget where it came from, and to remember the things that have stayed the same. And so just looking at an image of my grandmother and her cousin, this photo was taken in Stockton, California in the early 90s. You can see that the outfits have changed a lot. Today, this image of the young ladies is from a Hmong New Year in Sacramento here, which happens at Cal Expo every year during Thanksgiving. And you could just see a vast difference, a vast change. And the variety and types of clothing, they aren't necessarily regionally based anymore. They're very creative and up to individuals' own taste and preferences and creativity and forms of expression. They're also, brought in from a variety of other places. So the girl in the middle with curly hair in red, she has this huge hat on, and this outfit is from China. And so there's a mix of all sorts of styles and traditions that is happening, which really is just showcasing this new type of landscape that's emerging. We don't necessarily have regional dress anymore because we're able to move beyond our regions and to connect with other people and learn about them. So I just want to show you that even with all of this change, however, there are defining characteristics that continue to remain the same. And I want to share what those are. And so it's kind of like an anatomy of Hmong clothing. So there's the jacket, and you can see here that Hmong jackets, which you can compare to other jackets, such as Mien jackets, for example, they do look different in terms of how they're made. Hmong jackets have these blue collars or these colored collars that start from the neck and move all the way down to the bottom of the jacket. And then they're also defined by these cuffs that are folded backwards or often just sewed on. And this is a woman's jacket. And so women's jackets and men's jackets differ. And women's jackets are defined by this back collar, which in the Hmong language is called the da chaw. Often this is called the sailor's collar as well. And so you'll see that, it varies between men and women. And traditionally in the past, they've not been hemmed because jackets are put on first and then pants and skirts are put on over. So you don't need to go through the trouble of hemming them, but nowadays they generally are hemmed. And this is just, these look quite similar, but they're actually different. Historically, they've represented different regions and different regions actually. So the left, the more, the brighter blue, the teal blue, is the blue color that white Hmong groups from Luang Prabang would wear, whereas this darker blue color represents the Sangwang region. They're both white Hmong jackets, but they represent different regions that are a bit further away from one another. Luang Prabang is in the north, Sangwang is more centralized. And then this is a comparison between a white Hmong and black Hmong, often grouped in with like green Hmong and Hmong Lang too. The black, green, and Hmong Lang groups are often grouped in together. They seem to be assimilating into one another in terms of identity, just like how we talked earlier here in California. And so this identity grouping is not as distinct anymore, whereas if you go back to China, like they're very distinct, separate groups. But the difference here is the color and the choice of applique. So for the white Hmong, it's just one strip of blue, but for the Hmong Lang and the black Hmong and the green Hmong, they really prize themselves in applique work and reverse applique work. And so you see that they have a collar that's appliqued with many layers to create this stripe effect. And men's jackets are a little less distinguishable. They have a front that closes. It can be just straight up, or it can be off to the side. Generally, groups, men from white Hmong groups will have the blue cuff, but they don't necessarily have the blue collar. And these are men's jackets because they don't have the back collar piece. And then groups from the green Hmong, black Hmong, Hmong Lang generally are all black and are often cut at the midriff. So you can see an example right here, the shorter jackets that are all black among the men. These are black Hmong, Hmong Lang groups. And then on the other end is a white Hmong family. And you can't really tell in this photo, but if you look very closely, all of the boys' cuffs, they have blue armband cuffs. This is a very decorated jacket. It's a Hmong Lang jacket. You can tell because it's short, but it's very stylized. They have these star motifs on them, which are very representative of groups in Thailand. And I just think they're very pretty and ornate that I wanted to share. And then here are some older examples of striped jackets from the striped Hmong, which can be white, can be black Hmong groups. And also this style of striping has transitioned over to vests as well, which became very popular in the 90s here in California. And this is another example. But talking about, the stylized lines and stripes and collars and cuffs, these are more modern interpretations of Hmong clothes. And so you can see a lot of those forms are kept in contemporary Hmong outfits. This black dress to the left, for example, has all these frills, yet they've created these frills that mimic like the Hmong collar. And then they have very sheer sleeves where it looks like there's almost no sleeve at all. But then it's attached to these very large ornate cuffs. And so there's this tradition that remains the same in saying this is a Hmong jacket. For pants, white Hmong men and women will wear narrow pants. And then this harem style wide pant leg is generally worn by men from green Hmong and Hmong Lang groups. Women have historically not worn these pants, but I wear them from time to time. And then we also have the skirt. And so for the Hmong in the US and the Hmong from Laos, the skirt is made of 3 sections, and Hmong skirts are really defined by their pleats all throughout the diaspora. It's, something that we also share with other like close Miao ethnic groups. But there are 3 sections. There's the top section. This is a white Hmong skirt. There's a top section which has this braid or this embroidery that is called the centipede, and that really holds all of the pleats together. And then there's the middle section, which we kind of went over earlier where the batik was, and then there's a bottom section. And you can see here more distinctly that when they become ornamentational and stylized, you can still really see the three separate makeups, where this is the skirt from earlier, but the middle section is batiked and very dark, and then the bottom section is embroidered. And even with this extremely styled skirt, off to the right of it, you can still see remnants of those three areas underneath all of the colors, and pleat and applique and embroidery on top of it. So these skirts have really evolved. They've changed over time. Today, there's a very popular type of skirt that has emerged since 2020 called the Li Long skirt. And this is sort of a tribute to these vintage nylon fabrics that came about in the 80s and 90s that like artisans and women started adopting into Hmong clothes. They look like this, and so there's a really big craze for them right now. A lot of people are collecting these Li Long skirts, and essentially the name Li Long just comes from the name nylon, because in French it's pronounced nylon, and so that caught on, but it's not necessarily used to refer to nylon. It's very specifically in Hmong used to refer to these sorts of floral fabrics that have become just ingrained in our current and contemporary textile culture. And so you can see just a variety of skirts now. When they applique, they don't use just plain fabric, but they'll use these beautiful floral nylon fabrics. And so this is an image of the recent Miss Hmong USA from 2022 wearing a Li Long skirt at the Fresno Hmong New Year, which is the largest Hmong New Year throughout the state. And then this is a private collector, Linda Zong, who has a variety of Li Long skirts and full Li Long outfits. And then moving on, we also have aprons and belts. And so aprons generally have a middle section, and they're made from 3 or 4 panels. They're worn both in the front and the back when you're wearing a pair of pants. But if you're just wearing a skirt, then you just wear one in the front. And there's also the creasing, like I mentioned earlier, in there. And then we have a variety of belts. And these belts are generally red and green. They can be worn plain or decorated, and they can be layered on top of each other. And this red and green really goes back to memory and diaspora and land. They commemorate the crossing of the Red and Green rivers. If you take a close look at many of these diaspora story cloths, you'll find that they're defined by this river that is the Yellow River and becomes the Mekong River. People had to cross to get from Laos into Thailand to the refugee camps. But up in the corner, there are these 2 tiny red and green rivers. And growing up, I always thought these were legendary mythical rivers, part of oral history. But as I learned through my travels, these are actually very real places, because China is separated from Vietnam. The Chinese and the Vietnamese border are separated by the red and green rivers, which really just connotates the separation from China and this migration down into Southeast Asia. So then you find that many Hmong groups in Southeast Asia wear red and green versus Hmong groups in China that don't necessarily incorporate these colors because they've yet to cross the red and green rivers. They stayed in China. So often aprons and belts can be connected to one another. Aprons can be made inverted, so you can change up your style as you wish for the different outfits that you may want to wear or what you're feeling like. In the past, you can see here, like the belts have these embroidered squares that then connect to a sash, and you can wrap that around you. This is a closer look at the embroidered squares. So these squares are actually reverse appliqued, and then there's tiny embroidery on top of it, and they're made up of 5 squares. And then you can wear them and layer them on top of each other, cover them with more embroidery, cover them with the sash, and just have a bit of it peeking through, which was the style back in the day. But nowadays, they're changing. And so people don't necessarily want to wear layers and layers of fabric because it's not appealing. They want to look slim, they want to look sexy. And so Hmong clothes have really become efficient, where you see here that they're actually combining a variety of layers. Instead of having the sash wrapped around to be tied in the back all beautiful like this, you just have a sash that's been added to the belt, and then you just wrap it around and pin it on. And headdresses are also very defining of region. They've changed quite a lot. Like I was saying, cloth is a symbol of wealth. So in the past, people would love to wear layers and wear layers and layers of cloth on their head and around their core of their stomach. But nowadays, efficiency has really taken over and is preferred. So these hats here on the right with these girls from Fresno back in the 90s were most likely made from foam and then simply covered in black fabric for ease and efficiency. And in the past, headdresses were wrapped. So they were wrapped like turbans. They were wrapped in an X shape to create this turban effect, or they were simply wrapped in an O shape around the head. Sometimes they were kept straight up. Sometimes they were pushed in to create a pointy look, or maybe they were wrapped back to the front and then pushed to the back to kind of create this flowing hair look. And a lot of these hats look very similar when they're in regions that are close together. So for example, these two are from Udamsai and Luang Prabang, which are provinces right next to each other. And you can see the similarity in them with just the shape, along with the types of pom-poms and the colors that are used. And then this is from Luang Namta and Luang Prabang, another style from Luang Prabang, which both look very similar. And these styles kind of trickle down into Thailand. These are of white Hmong groups, by the way. And these are new recreations of styles from striped Hmong in the Hua Pan region, along with from Vietnam and China. And then lastly, we have this very pointy look, which the hat with all of the coins, we actually call that the princess hat here, but you can see that the silhouette is very reminiscent of styles from Vientiane province, where the cloth would be wrapped around the head, and instead of just going straight up, they would push it in to create this pointy look. And last but not least, we have the purple turban, which is very popular. I think if there's any regional hat that represents Hmong Americans, it would probably be the purple turban, just because it's taken on this very iconic look and iconic representation for many Hmong girls today. And then we also have symbols and motifs that are very defining of Hmong textiles. So it's not just the colors or even the makeup of the clothing themselves, but the motifs that we embroider and we applique and we draw through batik that then get put onto our clothing in different areas, like the cuffs, the belts that you saw. And there's a very expansive list of symbols and motifs on hmongembroidery.org, which I really encourage all of you to look at. But meanings, of course, change from region to region. So a lot of the meanings on this website document motif meanings among people in the US. So a very popular and notable symbol would be the swirl. This could exist in a single swirl, which represents a snail. And then with 2 swirls, that represents a double snail. With 4 double snails together, that represents an elephant's foot. And that's taken, it's adopted Western motifs such as the heart into that, which looks really similar to the traditional motif of the ram's horn. You can see this swirl, not just here among the Hmong in California, but also going back to Vietnam and to China. So the image of the baby has a double motif or a double snail on the baby's hat. And oftentimes these two swirls will actually become the eyes of a tiger or the eyes of a dragon that can then keep the baby protected from bad spirits as you're going about your day, walking to and from your plot of land to farm. And then this beautiful green jacket right here is from the Black Hmong in Sapa in Vietnam. And you can barely tell because they're so geometric, but they also are swirls as well. And then when you move to the last image, this is actually embroidery work from white Hmong groups in Yunnan province in China. And their interpretation is a little different. This is an inverted elephant's foot, and it actually represents the head of a golden pheasant, which is a sacred animal to the groups there. And then just a brief overview of other symbols that are very popular among Hmong Californians. There's the house symbol. You'll find the cross or the X in multiple forms, including the cross stitch. Right next to it is the hook, and you see a bunch of X's behind it that have been drawn out in batik. The hook itself can represent a variety of things. I've looked into the interpretations of the hook. They reference like a hook that's used to wind thread when you're making thread from dried hemp twine. They can also be hooks that really serve as like pillars to put up fences. But what they represent is protection. And then there's a varieties of triangles and diamonds. Sometimes triangles and diamonds also represent flowers, which are depicted in a variety of ways. And of course, there are these intricate geometric maze designs, which represent landscape and gardens and mountains and rice terraces. So thinking about motifs and symbols, it's just very interesting. For me, I'm very interested in studying textile motifs and symbols because there's this mythology and this, this story that they used to be connected to an ancient writing system that we have. And this piece to the left here is one that my paternal grandmother made, which is just exquisite. She's passed now, but as I'm getting older, I'm learning that she really was a master artisan in applique work. And then the piece next to it is a piece that was gifted to me by a grandmother that I'm very close to as well. And I just thought it was so interesting and remarkable how similar their patterns are, because this motif, which is called the fairy's finger or Bonzongdite, actually is very specific to the back collar among the white Hmong groups from Luang Prabang. And so it's very interesting how even in utilizing different techniques like applique from embroidery, you see the shape and the silhouettes and the same types of motifs reused. It's very geometric. It doesn't look identical. The flowers aren't placed in the same places. So this is a better. So you see I've circled like the square shapes, which are flowers. And then there's little triangles and the overall silhouette of the fairy finger. But it's very interesting because all of these shapes are preserved. And my grandmother isn't around for me to ask, but the other grandmother who gifted me the jacket to the right said she embroidered this from memory. And so it's just very interesting that in the past, they didn't have photos, they didn't have, the internet. They simply remembered these patterns and designs from their grandmothers and the people who came before them, and they reintegrated them and reimagined them into new pieces that were then shared and used by other community members to really become a representation of identity. And so another really great example comes from the John Michael Kohler art collection of simply the power of design and how strong they stay in the psyche of the Hmong people through textiles. Are these three pieces from their collection, and these three pieces were made in different times by different people in different places, but they look identical to one another. So the first piece was made in the 1940s in Laos. The second piece was made in the 1980s in Thailand, and then the last piece was made in the 2010s here in the US. And they're made by completely different people, but you can see that they look identical to one another. And these are actually funeral squares that represent plots of land that then the deceased can take with them into the afterlife to really build a new life with, to have land, to have agriculture. And it's just really interesting and powerful how important these designs are for people to remember them so distinctly and carry them on. And so the work that I'm working on right now as a design student really is inspired by these three pieces and rests in these three pieces. And I'm wrapping up my work now to graduate here in a few weeks. And I'm expanding my own ntaub practice and textile practice to look at this changing landscape that I've been describing. And really understand how we can continue to utilize textiles and textile art and expression in a way that continues to connect and help our community today in understanding their past, in documenting their stories and history and culture. And so we have a graduate show opening on June 8th at the Manetti Shrem Museum in UC Davis. And I really invite all of you to find it on the Manetti Shrem website and then join us. It'd be really great to meet some of you. So just as a quick overview, you know, Hmong textiles are an art and they're a craft, and they're also a type of design that has been functionally used for collective memory, for documenting history, for documenting migration and expressing identity, to keep a people unified in displacement as they've been spread all throughout the world. And they're very tied to land and place. And, you know, for my work, I really use it to reflect on this new landscape that I've sort of touched upon, this global landscape, the land that we live on here in California, what does it mean? And also this digital landscape, this landscape where, you know, technology is emerging, how do we interact with one another on all of these new sites and landscapes. And so I've been able to tell you a bit about just my own knowledge and research with Hmong history here in California, especially through the perspective of Hmong textiles and Hmong fashion. But, you know, the community here is thriving and there's so many amazing people doing amazing things. So I just wanted to shout out like different organizations that you should know about or get in touch with that you might be interested in. Hmong Youth and Parents United is a local nonprofit here in Sacramento, and they're located at the Hope Center. They have a variety of wonderful community events that are open to the public, and it's a great place to meet other Hmong people and interact and engage and learn about the Hmong culture. They really are focused on supporting youth. And same thing for Flu Hmong Center, which is located in Merced, California. And then there is, I spoke a little bit about Hmong Story 40 when I was talking about the first family in Sacramento. But that was really an effort to celebrate the Hmong's 40 years in the US, and it's been quite a while. So we're coming up on the 50th year that we've been here in the US and in California, starting in 2025. And so there's a new effort called Hmong Story Legacy that's taking place, which includes a series of exhibitions, ongoing collecting, you know, images, artifacts, stories from community members to document and to hopefully archive in an effort to create a historical museum here in California for the future. And in talking about that, I did also talk a bit about the importance that school systems had for families and for children and for moms and dads in the early years here. And that tradition has completely continued. My father is also a teacher. He works at Susan B. Anthony, and they have a Hmong immersion program where they're teaching children in the Hmong language and transitioning them into an English academic classroom setting so that they can move on into middle school. But it's a wonderful program that helps kids retain their language, because that's an issue in the community. Is, it's hard to learn Hmong and retain Hmong when all we do is speak English, and so much of who we are rests in our language, just like how I was describing all of the meaning behind bandao and flower cloth. And then there's also Yapeshua Academy. And if you would like to learn more, there are resources like at the tip of your finger you can check out. If you're interested in Hmong textiles or other aspects of Hmong culture and Hmong history, Hmong ABC Books is a wonderful store located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And you can go on their website at hmongabc.com, and all their books are up there. It's a wonderful resource. If you want a more academic journal-based reading, I definitely recommend the Hmong Studies Journal, which has been publishing since 1996. And then I just want to give a shout out to Alex Yang, who created that wonderful map of the diaspora. And you can check out his work on Facebook or Instagram. He also has an Etsy shop, so you can purchase the images that he's created of these different clothing styles, which are very accurate, and he puts a lot of research and time into them. So definitely support him. And last but not least, I also have a podcast called Hmongish, where we talk about all things Hmong. So we have 10 episodes out for our season 1, and we are getting in production for season 2. It's really made for a Hmong audience to talk about, Hmong issues that are affecting us, or just interesting Hmong topics, but it's open for everyone to listen to. So I think it's a great way to kind of dive into understanding what's going on in our community right now. And if you have any questions, you can stay connected with me. Feel free to reach out to me. This is my contact information. And I hope that this sheds some light. And thank you so much for tuning in. It's 7:15.
Thank you, Pachia, so much for that wonderful talk. We're now going to open it up for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, make sure to tap them into the chat. I see we have had some come in during the presentation, and my colleague Devora will be monitoring the chat for further questions. So one of our first questions is, for the retrospective show, has it been digitized?
Are you referring to the Cloth as Community show that we did?
Yes.
So that show itself is not digitized, but there are some wonderful photos that you can view at the University Library Gallery's website at Sac State. And that show actually was done in collaboration with Sac State Special Collection. And we showcased quite a few items from their collection, because they have a Southeast Asian collection. And so that collection has been digitized, and I really recommend people visit it and look at it and use it as a resource. It's a wonderful resource.
Thank you so much. What are the pants called?
In Hmong, like the word for pants, it's di.
In your studies, have you noticed changes in diaspora clothing, such as mixing of clothing styles between subgroups?
Oh, definitely. There's lots of mixing happening. I showed an image earlier, and there's just a variety of mixing, even not just with styles in the Hmong diaspora, but mixing and borrowing of styles from, Mien groups, Akha groups, different ethnic groups in Laos. In fact, some of the embroidery, some of the names we give to the embroidery we do is called Mien embroidery, to pay homage to the fact that this was embroidery the Mien people did, and we're borrowing it to use. And so there's tons of borrowing like that.
Are there community gatherings at various places in California where people can get together to marvel at each other's work, similar to the display you described at Sac State, but more informal?
No, but I would love to start something like that in Sacramento. I like a sewing circle, maybe. I think that would be really wonderful. And look for local Hmong nonprofits like Hmong Youth and Parents United and Blue Hmong Center, as I mentioned. They have public events, and a lot of times they'll have cultural shows, and they'll engage youth and elders, and you can go for special occasions, and it's a really fun time. It's a place where the community gathers.
Are all Hmong textiles created by women?
No, they're not. Um, it's not necessarily a misconception because in the past, there were gendered roles like women sew, women do this, men do this. But that's not necessarily the case. For example, story cloths were sewn very much by both men and women because they were a cash item. They were used for, they were made to sell in markets to help people be self-sufficient living in refugee camps. And so they became an entire family affair. Women and men would sew, men would sometimes draw, women would sew, sometimes children would help. And to this day, there's many men who I've learned from who are just fascinated and make their own clothing as well.
How did you begin your research as an undergrad or alumni? I'm referring to your travels.
So I think I've always been interested in cultural studies. Just as a kid growing up, I think I connected with it because growing up Hmong, I felt like I just felt different from everyone else around me because I had this super rich culture that was very different, shamanism, animism. So when I was learning about other cultures throughout the world, I just felt normal and very connected with everyone. And so I was always interested in culture. And I just felt like I didn't really understand my culture, which is a common feeling experienced by many immigrant children here in the US. And so when I went to college, I majored in anthropology, and I actually met a Hmong shaman who was very knowledgeable about clothing and the value of clothing and the power of clothing. And I had never known any of these things that I talk about. I grew up knowing none of this. And so I just became fascinated and I just wanted to learn everything because it was like I opened up this magical world that I had never known about. And so that's really what started my fascination. And I just became very motivated to travel and to learn about it. And that's been a big passion of mine.
I have heard that the lost original Hmong written language was sewn into Hmong women's skirts. Have you been able to find any facts behind this?
I have not been able to find any facts. But textiles are used for a variety of reasons, like related to documentation. I read a very fascinating article about how the designs on Hmong skirts among one family was used as a type of accounting to account for their livestock and their property. And so, people sometimes weave individual stories into the designs that they make. Like, this line represents the 4 mountains that separate us from this or that, and these 4 like circles represent I'm just making something up now, but people, you can put your own individual spin on it, which is important to note, because it's open for personal interpretation and open for personal creativity, even though it comes from this very long line of tradition that unites people.
Where can I get more information on an event on June 8th at UC Davis?
So I was referring to the graduate exhibition show where I'll be showcasing a textile installation that I'm working on that really explores this idea of Hmong indigeneity by looking at cloth as land. And this is a part of an exhibition I'm curating in Wisconsin, actually, with the John Michael Kohler Art Center, which will feature works by 4 other Hmong American artists. So it's a very exciting project. But for this initial show here in Sacramento at UC Davis, you can go to the Manetti Shrem website, and it'll be in upcoming shows, and it's up for 2 weeks, starting June 8th.
In your travels and research, have you encountered what kind of dress, clothes, or insights on what trans and gender diverse Hmong people wore?
No, I don't. And I don't, that's another area of research that I need to look into. I'm not aware of how trans, non-binary, LGBTQ people in the past express themselves, or how, if they could express themselves, or how. I do know of a few cases of men in the past. I hear of stories where they would openly wear female clothing and that would be accepted and okay. But other than those few things, I don't, and I think that'd be a very interesting area of research to better understand.
I've heard of gender roles tying sewing with women while men worked on the Hmong necklaces. And I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation here. Suave? Do you
Let me see.
XAUV? I apologize.
Oh, the sow.
The South. Thank you. Do you
Sow.
know any research that deems this true?
Oh, interesting. I mean, that makes sense because, you know, the traditional gender roles historically have been that women sew and then men are more silversmiths that would then work on necklaces. Um, from my understanding, the motifs are different. The motifs we use on our jewelry versus the motifs we use on our textiles, but I think there is a level of truth to that. And I don't think I can personally speak to that.
What are some of the best ways you've seen organizations and/or experts help college students learn about the Hmong diaspora in the US? How can libraries help?
Okay. What are some of the best ways that I've seen organizations or experts help college students? Well, I think, you know, college students are very efficient in themselves. Every college that, like, I think every single UC and many state colleges have Hmong student organizations, which is great. I know that at Sac State there's Project Hmong, which was started really as a part of the academic success program there. And they really put a focus on Hmong experiences and retention of Hmong students and highlighting the Hmong culture and helping them have a more visible presence on site. And so I can only imagine that with more and more Hmong faculty and staff being hired at different universities, I think there are a variety of things happening. Hmong Story 40, for example, partnered with UC Merced back in 2015 and was able to showcase that. And libraries are a wonderful resource, not just for books, but special collections at Sac State, for example, has a wonderful collection of Hmong art and objects that can really tactilely help students learn about themselves.
How can I begin my own research travels? I want to become a writer/researcher.
Write to organizations that you'd like to work with. That's how I started my journey.
Is this a long-term project-based collaboration with the communities in Wisconsin? And is it joined by groups in Minnesota?
So this is an exhibition. If there's a long-term projects that can come out of it, I think that's really exciting. And I know Minnesota is just right next door, so I would love to think more about how to get different groups in Minnesota involved as well.
Okay, we have just a few more minutes here. So are there any other questions that are coming up in chat that anybody is seeing? Let's see, I'm going to go check our document too and see what else came up. Some questions that came up for me personally on this. I was wondering about the dyes and colors that I was seeing. Have you noticed them changing over time in your studies?
Yeah, so
Okay.
even in the early 1900s, people had access to fabrics coming in from China. And so a lot of people, Hmong people have a history of making hemp, but when it comes to cotton or linen, which is often used for headdresses and jackets, they generally bought those from traveling traders from China. And so that I don't have too much history on that. But for the skirts in particular, artisans generally spend more time making all of the materials from scratch, like growing the hemp, dyeing the hemp, batik, indigo. So the blue color comes from indigo. And there are other colors that come, like yellow, for example, can come from turmeric. There are other natural dyes that I'm a natural dyer, but I don't have any specific natural dye knowledge about what was available in Laos. And I use generally like commercialized, understood natural dyes here in the US. But yeah, indigo is very well used for skirts and other textiles, and there's a wonderful tradition of just utilizing indigo in different ways, like creating a sheen by applying different materials on top of indigo to create this very crispy look or to create a very shiny look. And those traditions, unfortunately, are not as practiced among Hmong and Lao. Those are more practiced by Hmong in Vietnam up into China.
Yeah, I got another patron question. What will you do after graduation?
I do have a few plans. And so I may be teaching. I may also continue curating, which is very exciting. And of course, I'm very interested in continuing to work in my studio on culture through cloth to share a few projects that I have in mind.
Okay, two final questions, and then we're going to have to call it. The first one is, what are the wedding dresses called?
So I don't think there's a name for wedding dresses. I'm not sure if you're referring to like maybe wedding dresses that are made today, like contemporarily, to be a wedding dress with maybe like Hmong designs integrated into that. Because in the past, for weddings, what women and culturally, not just in the past, but today culturally, women would wear the outfits of their family. So when I get married, I would wear the white Hmong from Luang Prabang outfit. And that would be my wedding outfit. And there's a very symbolic thing with that, in that, you know, when you're getting married, then you will eventually change out of that outfit and put on the outfit of your husband's family to symbolize the shift in joining your husband's family.
Okay, one final one. What is hemp called in Hmong?
Hemp is called ntaub in Hmong.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for
Okay.
joining me.